The winter wind dragged fingers of icy air across the tarmac of Leiston Airfield on the eastern edge of England, where the base lay shrouded in a pale pre-dawn glow that made the P-51 Mustangs look like ghosts waiting for their names to be called. Captain Reed Dalton stood beside his aircraft, Carolina Bell, painted in dull olive drab except for the polished nose art his crew chief insisted on keeping immaculate. The ground crew moved around the plane with quiet precision, checking ammo belts, fuel lines, and coolant levels under the dim red lamps. Reed rubbed his gloved hands together, breath clouding as he stared at the distant horizon. January 1945 had wrapped all of Europe in a cold so bitter it seemed the war had frozen in place, waiting for someone to break the stillness. He adjusted his leather jacket and looked across the flight line where the other pilots of the 357th Fighter Group were preparing for the day's mission. He recognized every face, every smirk, every nervous tick. They had all been boys once, farm kids, factory workers, college dropouts. The war had aged them into something harder, something that carried both confidence and dread inside their chests. Reed reached up, brushing the edge of the white band on the fuselage, the mark of the Yoxford boys. They had earned a reputation that traveled through German radio chatter, dangerous escorts, relentless hunters, pilots who never left a bomber behind. But even legends bleed. The briefing that morning had been simple. Another escort mission over central Germany, this time guarding a formation of B-17s striking railway hubs near Munich. The Germans were desperate now, but desperation bred deadly pilots, men flying Messerschmitt 109s and FW-190s who fought like cornered wolves. Reed climbed into the cockpit, feeling the familiar cold bite of metal beneath his gloves. The world inside the Mustang was cramped, intimate, smelling of oil and aluminum and fading traces of gunpowder. He touched the photograph taped beside the compass, a young woman with dark hair smiling softly at someone beyond the frame. "Morning, Anna," he murmured. His sister had sent the picture months ago with a letter begging him to come home safely. Reed wasn't sure he could promise anything. The engine roared to life, the propeller sending icy vapor swirling around the nose. One by one, the Mustangs rolled onto the runway and tore into the sky, their engines humming a low thunder as they climbed above the clouds. Reed felt the tension loosen slightly as he left the ground. Flying was the only place where the war felt far away, even as it surrounded him. The sky was his escape, unforgiving, exhilarating, merciful in its own strange way. Major Hollis, the squadron leader, formed up on the radio. "All right, Red Group, keep tight. Bombers are 60 miles out. No freelancing, no heroics." Reed allowed himself a faint smile. Heroics were the only reason half the squadron was still alive. They made contact with the bomber formation, 30 dozen flying fortresses droning steadily toward their target, vapor trails stretching behind them like chalk across the winter sky. Reed flew above and slightly forward, scanning the distant horizon for specks of movement. The sun glinted off frost on his canopy. The radio hummed with quiet chatter. Everything felt calm, unnervingly so. Then Hollis's voice snapped through the static. "Bandits, high 4 o'clock." Reed jerked his head right. Dark shapes dropped from the sun. Messerschmitts, diving fast, their wings angled like hawks stooping for a kill. The sky shattered. Bombers scattered into defensive boxes. Tracers arced in bright red lines. Mustangs peeled away from formation, engines screaming as they climbed to intercept the attackers. Reed threw the throttle forward, feeling the G-force press him into his seat as the Mustang surged upward. A 109 flashed past him, too fast. He rolled left, caught another coming in hot from the rear, and pulled the trigger. His gun spat fire, ripping across the enemy's wing. The Messerschmitt smoked, jerked sideways, then spiraled down, trailing oil like black tears. "Good hit, Dalton," someone shouted over the radio. Reed didn't answer. He banked hard, scanning for more threats. Another bomber below exploded into a fireball, debris tumbling from its disintegrating frame. Another spiraled out of formation, engines failing. Reed's pulse spiked. "Hollis, Bell 2 is dropping, trying to bail." "Leave it," Hollis ordered. "We can't follow stragglers, too exposed." But Reed had already broken formation. He couldn't help it. He couldn't watch another bomber fall without trying. Not after what happened last month, when he'd failed to protect Charlie Mason's fortress, watching it fall in flames when he'd been busy chasing a personal kill. He still woke some nights hearing Charlie's voice, distorted with static, crying out before the signal vanished. Reed found Bell 2 drifting downward, one engine burning, the bomber crew struggling to hold steady. 3 190s circled like vultures, ready to finish the kill. "Hang in there," he muttered. "Not today." He dove into their midst, sending a hail of bullets across the lead fighter. The German pilot, startled, broke away sharply. The second peeled off after Reed, guns blazing. Bullets tore through Reed's left wing, jolting the Mustang violently. He grit his teeth and rolled hard, losing the German long enough to line up a shot. He squeezed the trigger, saw metal flake off the enemy fuselage, but the 190 kept flying, undeterred. Another voice cut through. "Dalton, brake left." He obeyed instinctively as Lieutenant Boone, a rookie from Texas with too much courage and too little sense, swooped in from the clouds, firing at the attackers. His shots forced the Germans to scatter, but Boone's plane took a burst of fire across the tail. Reed saw fabric and metal tear loose. "Boone, pull up! Your elevator's hit." "I can hold, just need to—" Static. A flash. Boone's Mustang dropped like a stone, clipping a wing on a bomber's tail before spiraling downward in a smoking arc. Reed choked on a curse. He wanted to dive after the falling Mustang, but the sky around him was still hellfire. Another 109 came straight at him, guns flickering. Reed snapped the Mustang into a barrel roll, feeling the G's crush his ribs. The German overshot, and Reed dove behind him, firing a long burst that tore the enemy apart. The bomber Bell 2 finally leveled off, gaining enough altitude to limp back toward friendly lines. Reed exhaled shakily, relief battling grief like two storms colliding. Boone had saved them, at the cost of his own life. The rest of the battle blurred. Reed rejoined the squadron, fought off another wave of fighters, and watched as the bombers dropped their payload across the railway yards, explosions blooming like angry red flowers beneath the clouds. Then slowly, the sky began to clear. The enemy retreated. The mission turned toward home. As they flew back across the frozen continent, Reed's eyes stung, not from the wind, but from everything he carried inside. Hollis's voice came quietly over the radio. "Dalton, we saw Boone go down." Reed said nothing. Hollis added softer, "You did good today." He knew what he was doing. But that didn't ease the ache. Hours later, after the Mustangs landed and engines wound down into silence, Reed climbed out of his cockpit feeling like the weight of the entire war hung on his shoulders. He walked across the tarmac alone, past crews cheering returning pilots and medics greeting wounded airmen. The cold felt sharper now, colder than before. Sam, the crew chief, approached him gently. "Captain, Boone didn't make it back." Reed nodded once. Sam hesitated. "But you saved a whole bomber crew. They already radioed thanks." Reed looked at the sky, now painted gold by a sinking sun. He said, "We borrow this sky. Every mission, every flight, we borrow it, and someday we have to give it back." That night, as wind rattled the hangar doors and the world seemed too large for one man's grief, Reed sat alone in the dim barracks writing a letter he dreaded sending, a letter to Boone's family, a letter to explain a sacrifice that words could never fully capture. But when he finished, he heard aircraft engines outside, planes from another squadron preparing for dawn patrol. Life went on. The war went on, and Reed knew that he would be in the cockpit again tomorrow, because that was how they fought. That was how they honored those who didn't return. The next mission came, and the one after that. And through each, Reed carried the memory of every pilot who had flown before him, friends, comrades, brothers of the sky, men who lived boldly, flown bravely, and fallen silently through the clouds. And though the war would eventually end, though peace would return to Europe like sunlight after a long night, Reed understood something he would carry for the rest of his life. The sky remembers every one of them, and so would he.